morning, Trumptopia. This is the Almost Daily Zencast. With your host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. It is Wednesday, May 6th, 11:22 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Let's get the show started, folks. Thank you for tuning in. It's another one of those days, right? Weird and wacky. First things first, I got to start off with a little bit of a technical apology. Monday's show for May the 4th, entitled May the 4th Be With You, has a tragic technical flaw. I think I had the master volume set too high for some reason, and so the resulting audio track that got uploaded is obnoxious. It's loud and crackly and annoying, and I apologize to you. And it's a shame because I don't know that I could recreate it. I will attempt to take it down and see if I can just kind of scrub it clean using GarageBand and or something else. But I wanted to apologize for its overall shitty quality. I switched from device just to shake things up. So I was recording on a different device. I normally, the last year or so, I've been recording every episode on my iPad, and now I'm recording on my LG G7. Just for shits and giggles, and also because I wanted to reorganize the stuff on my iPad. It's a Gen 6, so it's not super huge in terms of overall memory, and I kind of hit that limit of I want to add more apps, and I need to purge other apps to do that. And although I really love Sprecher app on the iPad, I wanted just to switch it up and see if that would help me save some room. And I did have way too many sound files as music that I had used. But anyways, blah, blah, blah. Here we are. Caveat de jour. La COVID. Okay? Caveat is a noun, which means a warning or proviso of specific stipulations, conditions, or limitations. De jour is French for of the day. And I chose that title for this episode because I wanted to focus on my actual assessment of this situation with the quote-unquote novel coronavirus, otherwise known as, or AKA, COVID-19. I can't be the fact checker, right? I don't have the credentials. I don't have the time, but I can express my opinion as limited as it may be as to what I think is real, what I think is hype, what I think is outright shenanigans. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And I hope you will join me. First things first, I want to set aside the conspiracy theory angle. If you don't know where I stand on conspiracy theory and the conspiracy theory community, hang tight. I talk about it all the time. There's an episode right around here. I'm sure you can figure it out. Oh, one that I think might tune you into my general attitude is the episode titled Pick a Lane. Speaking of which, I saw a brand new iteration of the COVID-19 is really, quote unquote, conspiracy theory format, of which grand total, I think, and I totally lost count. I haven't kept an official list. I've been asked that to post my list, and I don't. And I should have, and I apologize to you. But I swear on whatever you need me to swear on, that despite the fact that I lack a list, I have literally, since January, and it's May, I've seen certainly upwards of 30. Sometimes I think I've exaggerated a little bit and said 40. But the point is, 3 decades, not 3 decades, what do you call it when it's just 310 things? 30 different, never mind, you get what I'm saying, approximately 30 different conspiracy theories claiming to know the absolute truth about what COVID-19 really is, none of which agree with one another. So that right there tells you that they must either all be nonsense or something like it, right? There's the newest thing I've seen is that it's all a setup, an excuse in order to stick that swab up your nose because, according to this theory, the swab is the device with which they are implanting the microchip that they are mandating everyone should be implanted with. First of all, never have I ever, in like the 30 years that I've been hearing alarmist warnings about microchips, have I ever heard about them needing to install it at the base of your like nasal cavity. It's always been somewhere else, in the palm of your hand, so it can easily be scanned with like a palm reader or something, right? Or in the forearm. It's never, ever, ever, until this particular weird new spin on the COVID-19 expose theory, suddenly they need to implant the microchips at the back of the throat. Nonsense. I mean, if this is their only way of getting us to do it, they're doing a shitty job. Okay, so that's why I'm like, let's set aside the conspiracy theories, okay? None of them ultimately really add up to much. Because if it's a master-planned false flag event, then did they inherently plan in their own stupidity and their own display of incompetence just for show? Because that ruins that theory, right? Like, it can't really be a master plan. And if it is a master plan thing, then Trump and his set of cohorts are not in on the plan, right? They're getting played as much as anybody else because their response to what's going on has, if it is a master plan thing, has played us right into the hands of whoever planned it. So, I said I was going to set aside the conspiracy theory and just talk about the disease in natural organic terms. And here we are. Let's do that. So first things first, I've said it before, got to say it again right here. I find it bizarro. I find it insane. I find it literally incomprehensible to me that human beings in this postmodern era somehow find it easier to believe that this thing is man-made and created for nefarious reasons than it is to believe that Mother Nature has the capacity to not only take our lives as individuals whenever she damn well pleases because she's motherfucking nature, but that she has the capacity to give birth to a competing form of life that can threaten everything we've built and rattle our society to its very foundations. To underestimate Mother Nature is to be a fool, willingly. In part because I've never seen human beings successfully achieve anything at a huge monolithic global level without a lot of infighting and stupidity and corruption and inherent, inability to really be absolute about it. Okay, so having said all that, let us anchor this conversation in the potentially incorrect, because I get it. I could be wrong. But I also sort of have a higher order faith in Mother Nature than I have in any conspiracy theory. Full stop. I don't care who came up with the theory. I don't care how convincing the evidence is. If it somehow inherently dismisses Mother Nature and does not take into account that the thing we call life has its own agenda, its own momentum, and its own set of tools at its disposal, that if we discount that, then we're being idiots. Truly, as a species, right? Okay, so caveat du jour. Here's what I think about the way, and I can only really speak in terms of my criticism to the response of the country that I find myself living in, right? I can try and critique everybody else, but it would be really unfair in a way because I'm not there to witness what's going on directly or personally. I'm reliant on the news sources, and that makes it automatically, a third-hand thing. And, second-hand information is bad enough, but third-hand, crazy. At a global level, though, having given all that, let's go ahead and just zoom out to a global level and look at the general range of ways in which the world has reacted. From what I've gathered, and again, as always, I apologize if any of the details of what I share are incorrect. This is an opinion show, not a fact check show. But from what I've gathered, it seems like we really run the gambit. From countries that are like worse, like even more insane than Trump's attitude, have just done nothing, right? Is it Switzerland or Norway? One of those beautiful Norwegian countries where everyone's a fucking supermodel and doesn't realize it. They said, you know what? We're not going to do much of anything. So they did some fundamental awareness, and some basic hygiene promotion, and that's about it. They didn't shut anything down. They didn't put out stay-at-home orders, etc. And we go to the other end of the range of extremes, according to statements made from, by people that I have very light connections to on social media, very questionable relations on social media. In other words, I don't know them very well. I've heard claims coming out of Australia that Australia is really fucking overdoing it and that they're really gnarly. In general, I think I would have to put the United States somewhere in the sort of right of center in the spectrum of reactions. It's not all the way to, if we're going to call that Nordic country that did almost absolutely nothing, one extreme all the way to the right, although I don't know that they are a nation that self-identifies as extremely right. Let's just go up and down, right? I'm not trying to make a left-right comparison here. One end of the spectrum is this extreme. The other end is the kinds of things that we're hearing out of Australia in terms of what seem to be reasonable, factual-based reports about how extreme their enforcement has been. The United States is in an interestingly self-contradicting, paradoxical place in that it's really sort of closer to the we did almost nothing side of the spectrum than it is the we locked everyone down and got really hardcore about it end of the spectrum. But in the United States, there is an overt fear-mongering campaign. And again, I'm flirting with the conspiracy theory here, but I'm not trying to present this as conspiracy theory. This I can see as a fact. There is an overt and very intense attempt to fearmonger beyond that what is actually going on. There's a lot of yelling and screaming from virtual rooftops about how they're taking away my freedoms. When honestly, I don't see that happening quite yet. I see the nation flirting with the slippery slope, thanks to Trump's own weird inclinations, towards getting to that precipice of then falling into the rabbit hole of real ideological, tyrannical madness, but we're not really there yet. Remember, politically speaking, this country is addicted to us versus themist exaggeration. The Democrats, although much subtler and much more palatable in their approach, they like to posit themselves, they like to play the part of the good guys wearing the white hat, fighting the good fight against the bad guys over there that call themselves Republicans wearing the black hats. And conversely, the Republicans did the same thing, although much more overtly, much more exaggeratedly, much more abusively, and much more absurdly, to the point that it should be obvious that they're manipulating you into hating your neighbors, your uncles and cousins, your fellow countrymen over ideological bullshittery. That, having all been said that, having said all of that, having laid all of that out there, here's what I'm worried about. Here's where my concerns are. The way this nation has responded to COVID-19 has been opportunistic. And I mean politically, right? From the Trump White House administration down. The Trump administration has been playing a game of two-facedness, of creating caveats every day and then rearranging those caveats every day, and of repositioning the goalposts. Y'all remember when we only had 15 cases of COVID-19 in the United States, and that for sure we would totally be able to just reduce that number right away. That failed. So the next goalpost was that it was all going to miraculously disappear organically by April. Well, it's May. And we were told we weren't going to lose more than 45,000 souls. Then it was 50 some odd thousand souls. Then it was 60 some odd thousand souls. The newest projections coming out of the Trump administration, which Trump does not like, despite the fact that it's his own people having to tell him, like, dude, this is really real. We're now looking at a loss of life exceeding 200,000 by the end of the year. It appears, according to new projections and models, right? Now, I don't think this is the deep state trying to manipulate Trump. These are the same people that he appointed to his COVID-19 task force, right? And this is what I mean. And mind you, the mainstream media is trying to call him out on this. I argue they're like, a decade or two behind. I sometimes, especially by hardcore blind faith Q Trump believers, get accused of just parroting the lamestream leftist media. But I don't agree with a bunch of the stuff that they do. I'm the one annoying my Democratic aligned friends, my Democratic Party subscribed friends going, hey, you guys, both parties do this to their base. So just because you are mad at the Republicans and you want the Democrats to win doesn't mean that that's really going to happen in the long run, because they're playing a more complicated game than that. Trump is an interesting outlier. He does not conform to the usual right versus left paradox. But I think that in part, that may be why they allowed him to run, right? Because it's disruptive on all levels. And as I've said before, and I'll say again, and I've stated this about him since before he ran for office, one of Trump's most brilliant skills is the ability to wrap up little nuggets of truthiness, to borrow from Stephen Colbert's genius vocabulary list of invented words, nuggets of truthiness, things that are so close to the truth that you're just going to presume they are, and then wrap them up with nonsense that you'll swallow whole because you see that nugget of truthiness in the middle. And he does this at both parties. He does this cutting both ways. Trump's response as a leader, in my humble opinion, has been one of trolling the nation. I think he's always been a troll by the classic internet definition of it, since long before he entered politics. I say that based on a lifetime's worth of being aware of him as a very cartoonish, over-the-top pseudo-celebrity. He's one of the original people famous for being famous for being an asshole, famous for being rich. And those are all dumb things to be famous about. As a con man, Trump always plays the people who oppose him as much as he plays the people who support him. And thus, he loves to throw red meat at his base and bones at his opposition. And we are where we are right now with this global shutdown and this pandemic situation precisely because of that approach. He has simultaneously assured us that it's going to miraculously go away, and also told the nation that they have to get vaccines. They have to get their vaccines, despite the fact that his base is fairly certain that he's somehow magically an anti-vaxxer. Even though he has obvious ties to Big Pharma, he's supposed to be fighting Big Pharma. Even though he has obvious and corrupt ties to big industry, he's supposed to be fighting the corruption of big industry. Even though he's obviously doing the bidding of the New World Order, he is supposed to be fighting the New World Order. That's what he's done with COVID-19. Dismissed it and minimized it, and yet heightened the fear and anxiety about it at the same time. And now, after what? Barely 2 weeks of daily COVID-19 super special important presidential White House task force shit show every day, he's suddenly dismantling it without any real meaningful reasons for doing so, just as the nation as a whole is catching up with New York. And here's what the problem is there. Overly optimistic analysis of New York will lead to the potentially dangerous conclusion that we're over the worst of it. Here's the thing. I know Mother Nature. I know Mother Nature because I've been willing to acknowledge Mother Nature and pay attention to her instead of dismissing her as a non-entity. Mother Nature is brilliant, fucking genius at adapting. The only reason we have survived this long as a species is because Mother Nature gifted us that ability. Now, we've screwed with our own gifts that Mother Nature has given us and turned them into toxic things, but that's a whole nother episode. Bottom line is, my deepest concern is that this disease is very real, and because of that, is not as predictable as everyone would have you want to believe. Now, I'm not trying to escalate fear about this, but I'm going to say something that should be mildly disturbing for most people. The fact of the matter is, we have always lived with this level of risk in regards to disease. The paranoid germaphobes, they understand. They have always, and I'm not claiming to be one, but I've always understood their thinking because I see what they're talking about, and it's like, yeah, that is the way the world works, actually. The germaphobes have always been concerned that we don't take enough precautions to prevent disease from spreading. We take a very top-down, dominant, and dangerous attitude towards disease, which is we will destroy it. We will wage a war against it. Why is that dangerous? Why is that, in my opinion, a mistake? Because Mother Nature is savvy. That's why. Because Mother Nature isn't some other fellow human being limited by human ideological limitations at all. Mother Nature is not limited by the nonsensical things that human beings believe. Some states are running with Trump's dismissive attitude and rushing to return to quote-unquote normal. Other states are being overly hesitant and dragging their feet. And, in a situation where, and remember, Trump was two-faced about this. I alone can fix it. Only I, as the president, have the authority and the power to turn the power back on, to turn the nation's economy back on. He said that. Now, the I alone can fix it was from earlier, I get it, and I don't mean to misattribute the quote. But that's his attitude. That statement, although not directly related to COVID-19, is an example of the way he thinks. The problem is, he alone can do jack shit. And that's always true. I alone cannot fix the world's problems. You alone cannot fix the world's problems. Donald motherfucking Trump, no matter how orange his face is or how golden his hair is, and no matter how many of his believers think he is the new Messiah, he alone cannot fix the world's problems. If he could, why do we still have all the problems? He's not fixing jack shit. He's just making enough noise to get his base to believe that he's fighting that good fight against all the evil enemies deep within our own nation that are preventing him from fixing all those problems. But what he's really doing is throwing red meat to his base and bones to his enemies. And somehow making arrangements to possibly help his greedy profiteer type comrades profiteer. Remember when he was peddling chlordane, chlorofluorogorb, whatever that weird drug was called? I don't have it in front of me. Hydrochloridone, whatever. Now, this could be fake news, but I have seen it reported on various outlets. But it seems to be that Trump, through some associates, had strong relationships to people who had decided, people who had ties to Big Pharma and to people who basically would make money from distributing this drug, which after some testing turned out to not be in any way, shape, or form useful. There's a lot of that going on right now, and it's only just beginning to come to the surface. And of course, because it's primarily being reported on by what Trump would call the left-leaning fake news organizations, it's being dismissed by the base. The fact of the matter is, though, while there is obviously a bias for and against Trump, depending on which media outlet you're talking about, even the media itself, no matter how riddled with corruption it is, they still also report things that are factual, right? Unless you believe the conspiracy theory that it's all crazy lies. I don't know. Can that many doctor and nurse testimony videos be fake? Can that many deaths be absolutely 100% false flag fake? I don't think so. And the problem is there are obvious and overt efforts being made to get people to disbelieve any reporting about the problems or dangers going on, and to disbelieve any of the reporting about the corruption going on. Now, I don't think that Trump is directly behind that, but he certainly doesn't mind it going on, and he certainly jumps on board when it benefits him. And he certainly loses his shit when people call him out on what a lousy job he's been doing. Apparently, and I posted about this on Facebook this morning because it was one of the first things I saw on the news. It was either this morning or late last night. I forget which now. But a group of Republicans, a group of conservatives that are associated with a nonprofit group called the Lincoln Project, I believe. I posted about it on my primary Facebook page. You can go dig it up there. They created a video that posted last night, or that aired for the first time yesterday, that just very directly calls out President Trump and declares him unworthy of Republican re-election in 2020. And apparently Trump saw it yesterday and lost his shit and was rage tweeting about it in the middle of the night. I don't care which side of the spectrum you think is true and good. No politician should be rage tweeting about valid criticisms in the middle of the night. No politician should be rage tweeting, period. Let's just put it that way, in my humble opinion. As I said before, and I'll say it again right now, the problem is with the fact that we chose politics as a modality instead of civic organization. I could do a whole episode about the difference between those two things. But I digress. This episode is about COVID-19 and what I think is going on. I think my statement flirts and begins to, slide over that line into conspiracy theory. But I do believe that Trump is Trump. He's not fighting for anybody. He's doing this for his own self-aggrandizement. He's doing it for ratings. He's doing it so that he can profiteer on it directly, indirectly, and in the future. And he genuinely lacks a capacity to really display empathy. And he speaks like he's the kind of person that would rather see the economy thrive than save people's lives. And I get the dichotomous argument there. The problem is that, dear friends, is a false dichotomy, because economics and money and profit, those are all things we made up. They do not exist in nature. People's lives are real as fuck. Now, the impacts of economic disaster are real as fuck too, which is the problem. That's the problem. We invented something that didn't exist and gave it so much power with our minds that it has a real life impact and causes pain and suffering. And for some people, this made up thing has become more important than life itself. Making money, thriving economically, profiteering ultimately, is more important than other people's quality of life. And when you get large groups of people thinking in that way, then other groups of people, especially those who do not have a vested interest in becoming more wealthy, in becoming more powerful, in becoming, more greedy, those people become the lives judged as valueless enough to be sacrificed. Is this about population control? I don't think so, not on purpose. I mean, unless Mother Nature has a population control issue, which she might very well, because we're slowly destroying her from the inside out. We are ripping her bones out of the ground and draining her of her lifeblood so that we can commodify everything that we can get our hands on to make money. The thing that Mother Nature asks of us is to transcend that. The thing that Mother Nature needs of us is to take responsibility for our own healing and to return to our spiritual calling of being stewards and protectors of this delicate and fragile womb that is the world. Not to destroy it and commodify it and make money off of it, but to take care of it, to nurture it, to live in harmony with it. And yes, that includes the frightening proposition that other forms of life will compete with us. The thing is, if we can focus on the opposite of dominance, if we can integrate ourselves into the web of life, balance will be achieved. Instead, we've spent generations and generations beating down everything else in an attempt to establish our dominance. And quite frankly, philosophically speaking, it is naive and borderline stupid of us as a species to pretend that our karma is not going to come around and bite us in the ass for what we've been doing to nature herself and to the web of life, which are our brothers and sisters around us, since we toppled the Tower of Babel. So I'm not talking about the last 10 years. I'm not talking about the last 40 years. I'm talking about centuries worth of having a toxic approach and attitude. Centuries worth of destroying nature in order to dominate it, instead of understanding how to integrate ourselves into it as a holistic event, as a spiritual journey. I'm not trying to fearmonger the idea that Mother Nature is out to punish us. I'm trying to say that in terms of what's going on socioeconomically and politically, we painted ourselves into this stupid corner. We need to hold the government that led us into this disastrous place accountable. And I mean beyond voting Trump out, which I've always said, like, okay, you all let him get voted in, or maybe the system wanted to vote him in, and we need to unify, demand reform, and change our political system into a civic organization system. That's a long, long journey. It's a lot of work. But the first step, in my humble opinion, is to sit down and abdicate the political ideology that keeps us blindered, that keeps us arguing with each other instead of healing each other. In terms of COVID-19, philosophically, we can fight and argue about whose ideological model is most righteous, or we can abdicate all that and really focus on healing ourselves and each other. And I mean beyond medically, right? If those of us who are healthy were truly all unified in a spiritual effort to heal ourselves and each other, then those who are fighting the physical diseases that we're confronting would benefit also. Not through some sort of hocus pocus magic, but through the organic ability to share energy that we've been lied to and distracted away from for centuries. That's a whole nother episode. We'll come back to that. What's going on right now is what we're stuck with, right? We can complain about having gotten here, but that doesn't help us rebuild. We are now in a position where we can either drag ourselves through a second and possibly a third wave, because disease will do that. Disease is a competitor. It is a predator. And we should not dismiss it. And we shouldn't get too contentious with it, right? Like, if we try to completely overwhelmingly dominate it, something will backfire and bite us back in the ass. Especially if we do it only half-assedly and then waffle and back down because it's inconvenient and or painful, economically speaking, right? There's a lot of work to be done. And tragically, I think most people just want to return to some sense of normal. And as I've said before, and I'm sure I'll say again, because the world needs to wake up to this, what was going on before, the way the world worked before 2020 started, however normal that might feel now in relationship to where we are today, was toxic as fuck and is not a normal that is worthy of our desire to return to. I understand the frustrations people are feeling. It is not easy to give up the conveniences and delightful, frivolous entertainments that we're accustomed to, right? But let's be really, really honest. As much fun as giant sports ball events in massive arenas seem to be, that's the bread and circus of oppression. No offense to everybody who participates and loves it and plays in it or loves it and admires it or watches it, but that's what that is. That's how it is used. As fun and awesome as it is to go to massive concert events and give more money to already incredibly wealthy people, and as innocent as any given artist might personally be, doing those kinds of things at a epidemiological, I cannot pronounce that word, at the level of epidemiology and at the level of what the germaphobes have been worrying about forever, those are really, really risky things to do, even before COVID-19. Because one of the most ironic things that has come about during this however long pandemic is all the people shouting about how this isn't that much different from the flu. Like, yeah, that's true. But the flu was a scary and really, really deadly pandemic that we sort of kicked to the curb through what? Social distancing. and then managed to sort of dominate by the combination of natural herd immunity, because we get exposed and then the survivors have natural tools to try to fend off the disease in future instances, and through the artificial process of vaccines, which in theory boost the herd immunity. I don't want to get into the argument about whether or not big pharma and vaccines are worth defending or worth destroying, because they're either good and they're about saving people's lives, or they're evil and nefarious and about achieving the New World Order agenda. That argument to me is meaningless, because as soon as we address the surface problem of every industry being about profiteering, then we can get into the serious business of doing things that are actually good for the human species. Until we address that root issue, it's meaningless to say big pharma is evil, or to say, there are scientists doing good work in there. It's meaningless because big industry like that is going to be a clusterfuck, ugly mess of all of it. There's going to be heroes in big pharma. There's going to be evil, corporate, greedy motherfuckers who just want to make more money in any industry. Arguing about that achieves nothing. Healing those people spiritually, that's another issue, isn't it? And tragically, we have been lying to ourselves about our own abilities in that regard. As Trumptopia experiments with rushing back to normal, quote unquote, and or negotiating some quote unquote new normal that includes and perpetuates social distancing and heightened hygiene and other mitigating tactics, as with any spectrum of extreme, the most likely place to find a solution that benefits the most number of people and causes the least amount of damage is somewhere through the middle. And yet we get conditioned to fight for the extreme options. My concern, someone asked me how I was doing today, a real life friend of mine. And I was like, been better, been worse. And I asked them, and they're like, and I mentioned that I'm concerned about the direction that this country is going in. I didn't go into detail, but, I meant about the fact that we are a disorganized mess. Oh, I was going to talk about testing. And yes, I know the media is harping about this already. The media that is biased against Trump is pounding the fact that, quite frankly, the entire approach to how this nation has handled testing has either been the result of a clusterfuck of stupidity and ignorance, or has been an interestingly calculated, plausible deniability at being incompetent in order to, expose as many people to this new disease as possible. Again, I said let's set aside conspiracy theories, but I also then, within my own set of opinions, flirt with the conspiratorial. I think that we are, as a nation, being toyed with in a us versus them. Let's see how much division they will tolerate and what level of extremes they will get pushed, right? How to what extreme will we let our society go all the way to the right or all the way to the left? But it's a pendulum swing. That's what I said when I saw him come down. This is like a new experiment in pushing the pendulum all the way to the right as far as possible. A tolerance test to see how far we as a nation will allow that pendulum to go to one extreme. But what happens when you push a pendulum to an extreme? It swings back the other way in almost equivalent extremity and then tries to find balance in the middle. If you're busy arguing about this conspiracy theory about COVID-19 is right and absolutely true and is superior to all others, then you're getting played. If you're busy protesting about your freedoms being taken away, then you've gotten played. If you're busy living in fear and over investing in this fear of leaving the house, this fear of engaging with others, you're getting played. Somewhere in the middle, there's a sensible, reasonable, well-balanced approach to this, and we are getting pushed in every direction but that. That's my concern, because that will guarantee. That combined with the fact that testing has been a load of happy talk and not enough tests, right? I know the media is all up in this, and I'm not just parroting them. I felt this, and I've personally believed this from the get-go. The moment it came out that there was a pandemic deploying, I'm like, okay, in a normal situation, presuming there is no conspiracy theory at all, then the first thing we would do as a rational, science-based response, the first thing we would focus on is testing. And it would seem to me, we would want to test everybody. Now, Trump has made all kinds of lovely happy talk statements, and I know that is a phrase borrowed from the media. He's been making a lot of encouraging, hopeful, optimistic, even aspirational statements, while simultaneously doing things that make sure that those goals don't ever really get met, reached. I forget the dates exactly, but he literally promised that anybody in the country that wants a test would be able to get a test. That is categorically untrue. Frontline responders are still having a hard time getting tested. And the Trump administration is doing a whole clusterfuck of things that along this line of thinking is two-faced and duplicitous and confusing and a clusterfuck of let's just get things to get worse. For example, and I'll wrap up with this as an example of why I think we need to hold the administration accountable for what they've done. Trump invokes or talks about invoking the Wartime Production Act. Doesn't really do anything about it for about a week. Finally actually does something about it, and it's kind of redonkadonk. It's like the first issuance of it was he demanded that an industry, I think it was some subset of the automobile industry, get into making ventilators. But now, the way in which that Wartime Production Act could have been useful is if there was a federal level kind of leadership that truly took charge and actually got things done. Trump didn't step up to fulfill that role, and no one else in the administration stepped up to fulfill that role. In fact, every instance of him calling out the Wartime Production Act have been redonkadonk. The most recent of which has been he cites the War Production Act as a means by which to in theory, prevent a food shortage by directing meatpacking plants to stay open, while simultaneously pulling back on the CDC and World Health Organizations in relation to those industries being forced to, the meatpacking plants being forced to stay open. An intelligent, authentic, well-intentioned administration that was genuinely intent on saving people's lives and returning the economy back to normal or a better place would have used the Wartime Production Act and developed very serious and stringent guidelines and made sure that the industry followed those guidelines. That is not what the Trump administration has done. He's told meatpacking plants to stay open, which they shouldn't if they're reaching 60, 70% level infections. That's we can do a whole episode about meatpacking plants, okay? Oh, but I will wrap up with this. So he's done this thing where he pulls up he invokes the War Production Act, but then doesn't provide any real clear guidance or leadership, which leaves the corporate moguls behind these massive employment centers to do what they want, right? Isn't that what he's supposed to be fighting against? These corporate overlords doing whatever they want and putting their workers at risk? He's encouraging it now. And this is our food we're talking about. And as I myself have talked about, and others, I was actually really pleasantly impressed. A couple of nights ago, I don't remember how long ago, but I decided I hadn't watched what's his name? Not John Oliver, the other guy. And a lot of people dismiss him as a serious Hollywood creep. And I don't agree with him 100% of the time. But this was something I was like, wow, I'm impressed. I didn't think he thought this way. Bill Maher closed a show. I think it was definitely the one where he had Jay Leno on. And I was like, I don't care. Jay Leno is not important to me. Now, if he had Johnny Carson on, I would have been much more excited. But the difference, or David Letterman, if he had David Letterman on. Jay Leno, not my guy. But that's not important. The important part is the thing that I was surprised by, Bill Maher, I think it was during the New Rules segment, he really, or maybe he was just after the New Rules segment that he does, he laid down his really harsh opinion about what's going on with the food system. And that's this. It's really ironic, actually, the way he presented it. What is it that social distancing is about? It's about preventing disease, right? And keeping, quote, the herd healthy. How do we treat our animals that we eat? The exact opposite. We treat them worse than people incarcerated. They live in filthy conditions, shoulder to shoulder, packed in really cramped spaces, hardly able to move. And he busted out this really fun fact, which I had been vaguely aware of, but I didn't realize it was as serious as this. And I encourage you to go look it up and double check it. But apparently upwards of 80 or 90% of hogs butchered for food are on the verge of dying of pneumonia. And I'm quoting Bill here. So in order to keep them alive before we kill them to butcher them, we pump them full of drugs, which of course then is in their bodies. These what are they called? Gosh darn it. What's the thing that you go to the doctor when you have a serious infection and they give it to you? Not antivirals, but they pump these sick pigs full of, not hormones. They do that too, though, during their youth while they're growing up. They pump them full of drugs to try and treat or prevent them from dying before we butcher them. Then those drugs are in their flesh, which we then eat, which then, as all of that works its way through the food cycle, means that we have drug-resistant diseases because there's an overexposure to these high-grade pharmaceuticals. And my point is, I didn't think Bill Maher, I don't know if he's vegetarian or not. He might be, he might not be. That seems like the kind of thing that he doesn't actually care about. What he does, though, care about is the way in which we treat the food that we're going to eat. And that's what I'm talking about. We shouldn't be having an argument about vegetarian or meat eater. We should be holding these massive, highly profitable industries accountable for creating the most disgusting and most toxic and most spiritually traumatic system of raising, cultivating, and butchering our food possible. Like that's what they've done. And for what reason? Convenience. Convenient. That's what got us here at all. Now, I'm not just talking about COVID-19, but about the entire clusterfuck of what's wrong with the world. We became addicted to convenience. And so we do not have a healthy and spiritually meaningful relationship with the food that we butcher. And I think we're supposed to. We do not have, as a species, a healthy relationship with the world around us that gives birth to us. And I think we're supposed to. we are on the verge of finding out if things are going to get worse. And I know that this is already being, bandied about a lot in the media, because if you believe in science and you have a basic grasp of epidemiology and biology and the way, disease vectors through communities, then rushing to a normalcy that we miss without adjusting our behavior is going to, especially since there is no vaccine yet, despite the massive amount of fear-mongering about a quote-unquote mandatory vaccine that doesn't exist. There's no vaccine yet, right? And there's no declaration there's going to be a mandatory one when they do have it. If we don't, and that's a big scary question, what if there never is a vaccine? What if this virus, what if this disease is savvy enough, is evolutionarily advanced enough to elude our attempts to dominate it and destroy it vis-a-vis vaccine? Then the only thing we can really truly do is adjust our behavior. Now, what we just went through was a really ignorantly deployed, stupidly planned out, and very unthoughtful attempt at adjusting our behavior. And it was an overreach of authority, in my opinion. It shocks and amazes me that the Trump base isn't outraged at Donald Trump. But I also get why. He claimed absolute responsibility for what was about to happen, but then also the very next day pushed the responsibility on governors. And then he has stoked the fires of dissent. So he's prompting his own base to be angry at their own governors who are trying to comply with Trump's own leadership. That's what Trump is about. That is exactly what Trump is always about, pitting people against other people. Do I think that the New World Order is going to do something horrible with the vaccine? No, because if that was what their plan was, they wouldn't still be hemming and hawing about maybe having one ready in a year or two. That's normal. Vaccines take a long time to develop. And it's, in my opinion, foolishly optimistic to expect one in 18 months or a year and a half or even 2 years. The history of medicine has shown that it takes many years and many different attempts before we find the thing that works. And even then, that thing might be toxic. It might be not the best way to do things. Ultimately, we also have to contend with this self-contradictory and unhealthy attitude about death. Death is a prerequisite for life. You are alive, you are required to die. And that's, we can do a whole episode about the ideological and psychological trauma we cause ourselves because we boogeyman death. And we turn a natural and beautiful desire to preserve life into an unhealthy, tyrannical idea that really just causes more problems. I mean, look at the pro-life movement. They kill doctors who perform abortions to save the lives of those babies, but they simultaneously prefer to kill criminals instead of healing them. And they love to send young people off to war. Everything about our society is toxic. As we move forward, as we try to contend with this disease, which arguably is not an artificial, man-made, agenda-driven problem, we have to be ready for this disease to surprise the living shit out of everybody, which I think it already has, right? so many assumptions about it have already been proven wrong. And it takes a while for that information to get through to the public, right? Like, there are still people out there who think that people under 30 can't get it. There are still people out there that think that, young people won't die from it, but young people have died from it, etc., etc. As we move forward, the spiritual opportunity, the esoteric challenge, the meaningful opportunity or calling before us is to open our eyes wider. Stop arguing about how woke we are, because ain't nobody woke. This is the dream. You are not awake if you are in this dream arguing with other people about how not woke they are. But every day, every opportunity, every moment is a chance to respond to the spiritual calling, to unify and transcend our limitations and achieve a species-wide healing of the spiritual trauma that is behind and at the root of all of this. Not the COVID disease, but the way in which we're responding to it. Not the fact that we profiteer, but the things that led us to establishing that system as the foundation for society. We need to address this spiritual trauma at the root of everything, or else we will just keep stumbling through a clusterfuck of politically, ideologically motivated actions that will, in the long run, not be the most healthy, the most uplifting, the most transcendent, the most empowering, the most appropriate response. And we will drag ourselves through more pain and suffering, either economic or disease-related or psychological or emotional or spiritual, because that's what we've been doing for centuries. As always, friends, I thank you for tuning in and listening to me ramble for way too long about stuff, and I hope that you appreciate it. Until next time, I have been your eccentric host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, and this has been a super long combo episode of Good Morning Trumptopia and the Almost Daily Suncast. I'm going to spend the rest of the day learning new skills, because I'm finally, as I've been hinting at forever, positioned to start working on a whole new level of this project. So hang tight as I start to, slowly over the next several days and weeks, start dropping examples. If you're really savvy, you'll notice that I've got one posted. More will be coming soon. Peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. Thanks for listening.